Many of our site visits included components of community engagement, but I'm going to explore 6 specific experiences and how they distinctly and deliberately involve their communities. This is in the context of a presentation for the Children's Services team at Salt Lake City Public Library. Our system has been keen to engage our community more and currently use outreach as a primary way to integrate ourselves into new areas. And while visibility is an important component of relationship building, the examples in the Netherlands demonstrated the impact and shift that came from co-creative engagement and implementation of community ideas. While I'll provide specific projects that came from these interactions, it's more the process these organizations use that demonstrate effective community participation. The basic process I've identified includes 4 parts: engagement, compensation, implementation, and reflection. They might not always follow this order, but each is important for demonstrating the value of the community input and measuring its effectiveness. I'll apply examples from the 6 locations in the context of these practices, drawing from 2 libraries, a museum, a university, an eco-garden, and a theater. Engagement is important to begin the co-creative process. Without outside partners, we rely on inference to make our decisions. And this can generate a very valuable program or experience, but it's never an authentic expression of patron expectations because we're still deciding what they'd like, rather than providing a context and a process for outside considerations. Compensation shows the community that we value their ideas. None of the examples I'll use give monetary compensation, but they do demonstrate appreciation in some way. Sometimes the compensation comes after the ideas have been implemented, but it's always important to follow through on what the community has suggested, otherwise they lose faith in the relationship. Starting the process with context and following through or redirecting suggestions is a way to strengthen community relationships. And the reflection is important to demonstrate the impact of the ideas and can bring more clarity to the process for contributors. Seeing how ideas might not actually work still supports community buy-in, and often there's greater investment and participation from community-generated content. Before demonstrating different ways each stage can be implemented through the site visit examples, I'll touch on some general themes that I noticed in the Netherlands, which could be of interest to our library system. Most of the public institutions we went to had non-gendered bathrooms, like we'll be implementing at our Sprague branch renovation. It was great seeing how effective and comfortable they were to use. And this has a changing table and a sink that's in the open area, so anyone can use those without having to go to a specific place. Also, each site visit that we went to started with a cart or a shelf of these carafes with water or coffee with cups, and there was an expectation that we would settle in for 15 minutes to 30 minutes before they began the presentation. Even when we just rented out a space for our final projects in the class, they had them provided on a shelf for us, even though no one was there in the room with us. And this is just a part of the culture that makes an impactful first impression. It might be a lot of work for our meeting spaces because that's a lot of dishes to wash. Another trend across our library visits was the shift from shelves to space. I'll talk about this more in the context of the university in Delft, but wanted to show some impressions from the other libraries that we visited. In the top right is the first floor of OBA, and the bottom left is the entrance to Open Library. Both of them create an initial impression that doesn't make books the centerpiece, while still being a strong and responsive center for their community. We'll talk more about space when we get to Delft, but for now I'm going to show you some of the programming they do at OBA, the main library in Amsterdam. We'll talk about some interactions they had with the kids about these piñata images, but first I'm just going to touch on the children's director. So this is a representative from the community that is immersed in the library world for a year. She gets to participate in programs. She did a breakfast at her home library branch. She met some local celebrities and was able to interact with her peers, giving responses and being a representative of the library during that time. And so this is a very interactive and engaged community member. She was compensated with books. I believe each month she got to choose a book, which was her salary. And they reflect on this experience. You can see the past children's director highlighted in that bottom picture and a review of his process. So they're continually looking at this and letting those who participate kind of have an element of control over how they interact. They had a more broad involvement with the community. When they were choosing the themes in this children's area, they asked the kids what they wanted to do, and the kids wanted these paper mache visuals to go with each theme and represent it. So here for the nature area, we have the elephant, the giraffe, this tree. And then when the kids wanted to extend it and do it for the other topics like sports and society, they were told they weren't allowed to anymore by the director. And this was mentioned by Maria as something that impacted the community involvement in a bad way. So this is an important part of that implementation and the follow through. If you can't go as far as they expect, you have to do some sort of mitigation and still help them feel represented and not abandoned. An interesting thing is the topics here were chosen by librarians in the system, and then afterwards they had the community response and input. You can see when we go to the open library, they have much broader categories, and that's because they had the kids involved early on in the process. They would show books to the kids and ask, what topic would this fall under? You can see in that top row of brown, they have long ago as the second from the right. And then in the time of the dinosaurs, it's really long ago. And those were the terms that the kids chose rather than history, ancient history, and that sort of thing, so that it was intuitive for them to use. And they've had a big response from this. They're also using it in their picture book section. But something I wanted to mention that we talked about in our services recently is updating our literacy kits. And these transparent bags were really appealing. So that might be something we want to look at. Also, having these individual packets, some of the parents I've interacted with have said they're worried about the books getting lost or returned separately. And so maybe having something that just gives an element and they can bundle them together themselves could be a way to increase the engagement with that collection. And looking more at the themes here, this is Eva, who is the Netherlands Children's Librarian of the Year, and she's the one that does all of the selection and processing for this process. The interesting thing is they don't separate the chapter books from the nonfiction books, or they blend them together by age groups. The top, you have the reading levels by age. That takes priority there. But for anything above, it's just the topic sticker, and that's as much as they're organized. You can see a little bit of the author's name below, but the sticker and the image that the kids chose is really the important part for maintaining this collection. At the Van Gogh Museum, there are two people that I'll talk about. I just wanted to mention Anne briefly as an example of someone who was able to work independently and accomplish something really great. And the community collaboration is impactful, but not always the best way to go. She had seen the way that a really high quality 3D printed work of art was so tactile and wanted to expand the museum experience to those with visual impairment. After working with an organization in England for a while, she established a program where they can touch, for example, a vase that's seen in the image and see how it would feel, smell some odors they've put together. Here's a little model of one of Van Gogh's paintings that they can touch and interact with to see the scale and how things are oriented to each other. That's been a really successful program for them, and a great way that you can just take an idea and run with it to accomplish something. Martin, on the other hand, is really working with the community. They're trying to engage a specific age target, so he's reached out to universities in the area and does a monthly pizza session where people can bring their ideas, and then it changes the way that the museum operates. For example, the tours that they'd been going on weren't very well received, so they changed it up and did more workshop experiences. And when they're going around and talking about the paintings, they're relating it more to their lives and personalizing it rather than having it feel like a history lesson. And that came from the student suggestions. It's continually reviewing itself when it goes into those monthly meetings, and the compensation, no one's mad about having some food. Some other students that were interacted with for this community feedback were the students at the University of Delft. Here we talked about space. That's what I wanted to really draw attention to here. They found that the students were all rushing to the study rooms and the tables, and the collection wasn't being engaged with as much. They've moved a lot of their books below level out of public use, and then they'll retrieve them and do it kind of like our hold system. And here you can see in the top left the image with the bookshelves that have now been replaced by these large red seats in study areas, which were inspired by train seats. And the students were really involved in this process, not just consideration for giving them space, but they got to try out seats that they would want to use. They expanded and added more study rooms, which they were involved with decorating, choosing heroes they wanted portrayed with quotes of meaning. And an even more direct way of allowing the community and their population to be empowered to affect the service is this VR zone, which came from an allocated budget from the library board, which the students can use any way they'd like to. So they propose something, and then everything's paid for from that. So that could maybe be a cool way for our community to have this amount of money come to a monthly meeting space, sort of like those pizza sessions, and talk about what they want that money to be used for. A little bit off the path of libraries, we're going into an eco garden next. And here, Deborah really immediately engaged us. She had us walk through the space. She had us look at the things around us and then come and chat briefly, and then gave us tasks to do in the space. We were sort of the community there, even though it was a setup program, but she had us involved. She let us choose which area we wanted to go to. Some people picked lavender and made these lavender cages. Others gathered greens that were just growing in the area and made our lunch, which was the compensation for this site. Deborah's also directly involved with people in their communities, taking walks with them to show them what's growing naturally in the area and how that they can utilize it and connect their community together through these open shared spaces. An example that gives a really immediate feedback for the community is improv. It's really dependent on that interplay. For example, this could have been a suggestion from the audience for the genre superhero, or maybe for a common item and they gave electric toothbrush. It's a little distracting, so I'm going to slap over it a picture of Boom Chicago. They're located in downtown Amsterdam, and they're an improv troupe. They have the yes and attitude that leads to unexpected places and engage the audience with an openness that draws them in and gets them to want to participate. The audience can see their impact really quickly, and it makes them more excited about the collaboration. Some way that they're also being futuristic and using modern technology is they had an iPad which would listen to the conversation and then generate responses from the vocabulary that had been fed to it. So here we've seen the way the contributors have drawn in and used information from their communities to improve their services. We saw the children's director from OBA, the students who got to choose the chairs for their study rooms, the urban gardeners who are bringing home food, pizza for hungry students, all brought in the community and used it to shape their services.